The topic of these two nights' lectures is Ancient Wisdom, Modern Therapy. A very engaging subject. First of all, let me give an overview of what this series of talks will be about. I'll tell you more about what sort of ancient wisdom that I am going to refer to and what modern therapies are. When I talk about ancient wisdom, of course we are referring to the wisdom of the Buddha. When we talk about therapy, I guess the first thing that would occur to your mind is medical treatment. So we are connecting the Buddha to medicine in a way. And that's not very far from the truth, because the Buddha likened himself to being a physician several times in the suttas. Now, what's a physician? A physician is someone who tries to relieve you of some physical discomfort that comes about because of illness. Now, the word physician is very important because it refers to the physical aspect of suffering, physical discomfort, physical anguish, and perhaps the consequential mental anguish that comes out of physical suffering due to illnesses. Now, the Buddha's approach, his wisdom, is very much in line with that of modern medicine, or not talk about modern medicine, of medicine from the very beginning, because it's diagnostic in nature as well as prescriptive. When you go to see a doctor, the first thing that he will need to do is to diagnose you, right? You will have to tell the doctor what are your symptoms, why are you feeling unwell, why do you feel sick. He will listen to you, get some feedback, and then he will put you to some tests. Test your temperature, check your pulse, your heartbeat, and so forth. Nowadays, there are more and more tests. Sometimes by the time they finish all the tests, maybe you'll be dead by then. Just to make sure that you are doing the right thing. But the Buddha was more than just a physician, because normally a physician can at best cure you of your physical illness. And at worst, he can hasten your death due to wrong administration of medication and medical procedure. Now, I don't know how true this is, but this is what I heard in one of Ajahn Brahm's CDs. Maybe you have heard of this before. He said that in Israel, many years ago, when the doctors went on strike, the death rate in the hospital fell. Any doctors around here? But I've also heard a lot of stories nowadays of unscrupulous doctors and specialists. There are some specialist centers which are particularly notorious because the specialists there have made some sort of agreement among themselves. So if a patient were to come, they would send the patient from one specialist to another to do all the specialist tests, and then they will get commission for doing that. Recently, one of our devotees in Taiping had some abdominal pains. First, she went to see a physician and then went to see a specialist, and they say, "Oh, you've got appendicitis, you must operate, take it out." But she had this gut feeling that it's not really her appendicitis, there's something wrong. Went to see a friend of hers who is a nurse, and the nurse said, "Well, why don't you get a second opinion? Maybe it's not appendicitis." So she went to see another doctor, and the doctor said it may not be. But when she went back to the first doctor was insistent that it is appendicitis and it needs to be removed. But she was a keen meditator, and so instead of following the advice of the doctor, she went back and intensified her meditation. Relaxed more, meditated to get more focused awareness, and then zoomed in onto the pain. And finally, she got over the pain and then went for another test. It was not an appendicitis. This is not the first time it's happened. Some of my other devotees have also come to complain about this. But anyway, the Buddha is more than just a physician, because the physician can only, at best, as I said, he can only cure you of your physical illness. And perhaps the mental anguish that comes about because of the physical illness. But the Buddha must be the ultimate psychophysician, because he gives us a prescription that can cure us all of all sufferings, not only physical, not only mental, but completely all sufferings. Why? Why is he such a super psychophysician? Well, because his diagnosis is correct, and his prescription is... What is his diagnosis and what is his prescription? It's very simple, isn't it? He diagnosed that there is suffering in this world. And he diagnosed that there is a cause for suffering. And he also gave us the end result, that there can be a cessation of the suffering. And he gave us the prescription. What is the prescription? It's the fourth noble truth, which is the Noble Eightfold Path. So within the Four Noble Truths, you can see that there is a diagnosis, and there is an end result, and there is a prescription, isn't it? But like all doctors, he can only prescribe. If you don't take the medicine, will you get well? No. The Buddha often said, teachers only point the way. When you come for my retreat, I only tell you what to do. If you don't do it, what can I do? If you only point the way, you have to walk the path yourself. So let's have a look at this, have a graphic idea of how it looks like. We have the Four Noble Truths. The Four Noble Truths are, number one, there's suffering. The second Noble Truth, there's the cause of suffering. The third Noble Truth is there is the cessation of suffering. And the fourth Noble Truth is that there is a path leading to the cessation of suffering. And then look at the category. The first two are diagnosis. This is what's happening, and this is the cause of what's happening. And the third Noble Truth is actually the end result. And finally, he gave you a prescription. Now, tonight's talk is about ancient wisdom and modern therapy. So what is therapy? Therapy is actually the subset of the prescription. A prescription is a treatment plan, and part of the treatment plan is a therapy. The word therapy actually means treatment. So what is a therapy? Although you say that the prescription is to walk the Noble Eightfold Path, that's not the end of it. When you walk the Noble Eightfold Path, something is supposed to happen. You know, when you take the prescription drugs that your doctor has given you, what is going to happen? The drugs are supposed to do certain things to your body, to the bacteria or the virus or to the biochemicals in your body, your glands in your body. So in the same way, when we walk the Noble Eightfold Path, what is it supposed to do? When you follow the Noble Eightfold Path, it's supposed to make you understand or comprehend suffering. And then when you comprehend suffering, then you try to look into its cause. And once you know its cause, then you abandon it. Once you abandon the cause of suffering, then the suffering will disappear. It's like attacking the root of the problem rather than just the symptoms. That's what people usually say in traditional Chinese medicine and in Ayurveda medicine. They treat a disease or an illness at its root. But Western medicine, the allopathic sort of medicine, tends to treat it symptomatically, treating the symptoms rather than getting the root cause of it. So the Buddha's method is getting the root cause of suffering, which is craving. And then, once you get rid of the craving, then the third Noble Truth is realized. But in order to comprehend suffering and to abandon the cause of suffering, you have to actually walk the Noble Eightfold Path. It has to be developed. So usually when we use the English word to realize the Four Noble Truths, it's a bit strange because you can realize Nibbana, you can realize the cessation of suffering. But what do you mean by realizing suffering, realizing craving, realizing the Noble Eightfold Path? It doesn't make much sense, does it? So what is actually used in the scriptures is the word knowledge. Not knowledge of suffering, but knowledge in terms of suffering, knowledge in respect of suffering. Knowledge in respect of the cause of suffering, which means knowledge that it has to be abandoned, and then you abandon it. That is a knowledge. And knowledge in respect of the Third Noble Truth means realizing that there is this cessation of suffering that can come about because you abandon craving. Then knowledge in respect of the Fourth Noble Truth is that it has to be developed in order to achieve knowledge in respect of the other three truths. So the ultimate end result of the Buddha's diagnosis is that if you can totally abandon all craving, then you can completely extinguish all your sufferings. But of course, not all of us can do that. If you can only abandon a little craving, then you can extinguish a little suffering. If you can partially abandon some craving, you get partial cessation of suffering. It's very simple. A lot of people have this misconception that the Noble Eightfold Path, in order to realize its goal, you have to wait until you attain arahantship. It's not necessarily so. Modern therapies prove that suffering can cease commensurate with your degree of letting go. The more you can let go, the less there will be of suffering remaining. The less you let go, the less suffering you can relieve yourself of. So it really depends on how much you want to let go of clinging. I'll come back to a more deeper analysis of this ancient wisdom after I go on now to give you an overview of the second part, which is modern therapy. Now, the basic principles of medicine are also very similar to the Buddha's approach, like I mentioned earlier. First, you have a diagnosis. You diagnose the patient's problem, listening to what the patient says, which are the symptoms, as well as taking tests to find out the physiological evidence of what's happening. And then they give you a prescription. Of course, the end result is to relieve you of your symptoms and hopefully your disease. So this is also a therapy. It's a sort of a treatment. As I said, therapy or treatment is a subset of a prescription, which is a treatment plan. Earlier on, I talked about allopathic medicine. Nowadays, we have more than just allopathic medicine, and naturopathic medicine is getting to be more popular. Examples of naturopathic medicine are Ayurveda and traditional Chinese medicine, which don't make use of artificially produced drugs. They try to make use of natural products, herbs, and so forth. Then we also have a new field that's called holistic medicine, which is a combination of allopathic medicine, homeopathy, and naturopathy. But as I said earlier, the aim of medicine is to relieve you of your physical suffering. Medicine is the science and art of healing, and it encompasses a wide range of healthcare practices, some of which are preventive and some of which are curative. And they are all meant to maintain and restore health in the prevention and treatment of illnesses. In other words, it aims to relieve physical suffering and consequential mental anguish. Now, a branch of medicine called psychiatry specializes in the study and treatment of mental illnesses. And because it's trying to treat mental illnesses, it requires a good knowledge of psychology, which is the study of the mind and how it influences people's behavior. Psychiatrists hold medical degrees, and they can prescribe drugs and other medical treatments in addition to conducting psychotherapy. So now we've got three words there. One is psychiatry, then we have psychology, and then we have psychiatrist, and then now we have the word psychotherapy. Sometimes people cannot differentiate, what's the difference between one and the other. So what is psychotherapy? So you see that a psychiatrist is actually a medical doctor, and he is a medical specialist. He specializes in mental illnesses. But because of his training in medical science, he also links the physiology of the body to mental disorders. And they make use of psychotherapy as well. What is psychotherapy? Psychotherapy is the treatment of mental illness, for example, depression, by talking to someone and discussing their problems rather than giving them drugs. So, a psychotherapist need not necessarily be a medical doctor. A psychotherapist could be just a counselor, a social worker. They learn a bit of psychology and then how to apply the psychology to help people to overcome their mental disorders. The series of talks is what psychotherapy tonight and tomorrow night will deal more with psychotherapy rather than with psychiatry or with medical science, because modern psychotherapists are looking backwards to ancient wisdom that is found in Buddhist psychology that was formalized about 2,000 years ago, what we call the Abhidhamma. Although many modern Buddhist scholars now say that the Abhidhamma is not really the word of the Buddha per se, many of the principles of Abhidhamma can be found in the suttas themselves. Although many modern Buddhist scholars reject the legend that the Buddha went to Sita heaven to preach the Abhidhamma to his late mother for 3 human months, spent the Vasa there and then came down after that at the end of the Vasa. That is a Theravada legend which modern scholars have sort of rejected. They say that's not historically proven. But still, the concepts that are found in Abhidhamma are being verified in many ways by modern psychotherapists in their study as well as in the application. Application in the sense of teaching people who have mental disorders to apply these principles of Abhidhamma and part of the Noble Eightfold Path to alleviate their suffering. And like I said, it depends on how much you can let go. The more you can let go, the less suffering you will have. If you let go less, then your suffering will be a bit more. If you let go more, your suffering will be less. It depends on how much effort you want to put in to be mindful in order to let go. Right. Abandoning craving is the second noble truth. It's the realization of the second noble truth. But in order to get there, you have to walk the Noble Eightfold Path. For us Buddhists, it's a package deal. You cannot just do part of it. It's a holistic thing. Now, why is that so? This is very obvious. If you're a meditator, you will know. If you try to sit down to meditate, but you did not try to practice the other factors of the Noble Eightfold Path, you did some unskillful speech and action, you are earning a wrong livelihood, and then you try to sit down and meditate, what's going to happen to you? Your mind will be very restless, having a lot of remorse and regret about the things that you did or said this morning. This becomes very obvious. Many of you would have heard of this Indian teacher called Govinkaji. Govinkaji is an Indian but who was born and bred in Burma. He was a very, very successful businessman belonging to a very rich, wealthy, business class family. He was actually a Hindu, but he was suffering from incurable migraine. He was able to travel abroad frequently, and he would go visit some of the best doctors in the world to try to cure his migraine. Went to Japan, to Taiwan, to Europe, the US. No one could cure his migraine. Until one fine day, one of his Burmese friends suggested to him, why not try this U Ba Khin? U Ba Khin is the founder of this particular method of meditation. They had one center in Rangoon, and he suggested to him, why don't you go to this center in Yangon? They say that if you practice meditation, it might be able to help you in some ways. So he went in. He was a Hindu, he was not a Buddhist, but anyway, he went in to try the meditation. For the first few days, it was hell, because there it's very strict. You are locked, so-called locked into a cell, and then you stay in the cell and you meditate. And the cell is so hot, you'll be bathed in sweat the whole day. In the Ubakin tradition, they sit a lot. Nowadays, they have relaxed a bit. But some years ago, when I went to attend one of these Goenka courses in Malaysia, it was very strict. It was 1 to 1.5 hours sitting. You go 10 minutes break to the toilet, come back again to sit another 1.5 hours, go back to the toilet for 10 minutes, come back and sit. So the total 14 hours of sitting per day, So for him it was hell for the first few days, because the first few days your mind is like a monkey. All the unskillful things that you did will come to you, and you will have to pay with remorse and regret, a lot of suffering. But after that, it seems that at the end of the 10-day retreat, his migraine was cured completely, miraculously. So that is one example of how ancient wisdom has influenced modern therapy. Of course, after that, he did not become a psychotherapist. Until today, he's still a meditation teacher. He left Burma and went back to India to teach some of his family members. And then very strangely, other people spontaneously wanted to join. Actually, he did not start a retreat for the public, he just wanted to teach his mother. And then friends said, I also want to join. Then people started coming, and then the group grew. Until one time he became so famous, he was invited to the prisons. The head of the prisons in that part of India was a woman who was very innovative. And she thought about what sort of things they can do to help the prisoners rather than to punish them. If you punish them, and then after that when they are released, they go back to the world, they'll come back to prison, right? Because you don't do anything to remedy their situation. So this woman thought, there must be something we can do to help them to change, rather than to punish them and put them back, and then they'll come back again very soon. And then one of the prison officers said that he had attended the Goenka retreat, and it has changed him tremendously. He became a less selfish person, more patient and understanding. Then he suggested to her, why not invite this Goenka to come and conduct the retreat? So after some negotiations, they started their first retreat with 1,000 prisoners. At the end of the retreat, the prison officers were all lined up to congratulate the prisoners for having completed their retreat. When they did that, some of them started to cry and hugged the prison officers. In the past, they're always thinking of doing something to the prison officers. But now, they start to cry and hug the prison officers. Now, finally, they admit that they were wrong. Before that, they never admitted that they were wrong. There's nothing wrong with them. It's society that was wrong, that sent them to prison. Or their father or their mother or somebody was wrong, the way they were brought up, circumstances forced them, to do this and do that. But when you meditate, when your mind calms down and it is collected and steady, then you see things according to reality. That's why the Buddha said, monks, develop concentration, develop samadhi. The monk who has samadhi can see things according to reality. So you cannot hide all these things from yourself anymore. You cannot have any more self-denial. All the wrong things, all the things that you have done, all the bad things that you have done will crop up in your meditation. And you have to face them. You cannot run away from them. So this is also another point that modern therapists have clinched on to help their patients. I've been talking about the 4 Noble Truths, but I did not elaborate on the 4th Noble Truth, which is the most important one. In order to be able to understand what dukkha is, what suffering is, in order to abandon the cause of suffering, and in order to realize the cessation of suffering, you have to walk the Noble Eightfold Path. So what is this Noble Eightfold Path? I'm sure that you all know. You have right view, right intention, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, and right samadhi. What is right view? There are actually 2 aspects of right view. Now, the word right in this Noble Eightfold Path has to be understood in its specific context. Because right and wrong is relative. It depends from which angle you're looking at. Okay, you see, it is right in relation to the ultimate goal, which is total cessation of suffering, which is Nibbana. It doesn't mean that if you have some of these qualities and you apply it in another way, not for the sake of total liberation, it is right. It is wrong, It is wrong in the sense that applying it for other purposes will not bring you to Nibbana. It will ease your suffering in that aspect, but not in Nibbana. Not total suffering. So what modern therapists are doing is that they are not taking the whole of the Noble Eightfold Path, because their goal is not Nibbana. Their goal is to relieve specific sufferings, specific mental disorders that their patients are suffering from. So they don't take everything. They take only a certain part of the Noble Eightfold Path. Yet, it is still so powerful. It's still verified by so many patients. And tomorrow, you might be able to see some facts and figures about how successful this has been. Okay, let's look at right view. Right view in the sense of the view that will lead to Nibbana. There's right view, there's mundane, and there's right view that is supramundane. The mundane right view is to believe in the law of karma. You believe that there is giving, there is a sacrifice, there is offering. You believe that there is a result of good and bad actions. You believe that there is such a thing as spontaneous beings who are born. You believe that there's such a thing as having responsibility and gratitude towards your parents. You believe that there is this life and the next life. Some people don't believe in the next life. They say there's only one life. When you die, at the end of this life, that's finished. These are the materialists. But the Buddha says that the mundane right view is that you believe that there is this life and there's a next life. And then you believe also that there are people, advanced practitioners, who have, through their own practice, experienced this life and next life, this life and future lives, other lives, not only this realm but other realms of existences. But these are all beliefs, because you will not be able to verify them. You may believe in the past life and the future life, but you can't verify them, can you? You believe in the law of karma, but can you verify what karma you did in the past that is causing the result that you are experiencing right now? You cannot. So this is only a belief. This sort of belief is only mundane. Believing in this way will not lead you to Nibbana, but believing these things will help to influence your ethical conduct. Because you believe in giving, you believe that there is a result of good and bad actions, so you'll be more careful. It will influence your behavior. You have what the Buddha calls hiri ottappa, conscience and fear of wrongdoing. The other day, we were driving from Taiping to Penang. In Malaysia, there's this rule that you must fasten your safety belt even if you are a passenger. Do you have this rule in Singapore as well? So as we were traveling on the highway, the back passengers asked, "Must fasten safety belt?" Then the driver told them, "Of course not, you must, this is part of the law of the country. But then you fasten the safety belt not because of the law, but for your own safety." The people, it's very strange, Like some of the people who are driving up to SBS, particularly our drivers. If you have been to SBS, Sasnaraka Buddhist Sanctuary, you will know how sharp the corners are and how steep the road is. These people, once they go into the private road, away from the main road, they will unfasten their safety belt. Going up the hill is a time when you need to fasten your safety belt, and they take it off. The sort of fear that they have is the wrong sort of fear. Fear of being fined, fear of having to pay the fine. It's not that sort of fear that the Buddha is talking about. He's talking about fear of wrongdoing, the consequences of wrongdoing. So this is actually something very healthy. In fact, in one sutta, the Buddha said that these two qualities, conscience, a sense of shame, and a sense of fear of wrongdoing, these two things can be likened to the guardians of the world. It's because of these two things that people restrain from doing bad things. But these are only mundane. If you refrain from doing bad things because you are afraid of their consequences, that will help you to fare on well in samsara. Then there is the supramundane right view. Supramundane right view can actually be divided into two again, intellectual and experiential. The intellectual aspect of supramundane right view is, number one, to believe in the genuine and complete awakening of the Buddha. This is very important. If you don't believe that the Buddha was genuinely and perfectly enlightened or awakened, then how would you accept his teachings? How do you know that his teachings are true? Right? How do you know that he's not one of those opportunistic spiritual masters, who is trying to be a con man and to get something out of you? Nowadays, people are so interested in spirituality, and there are many con men around acting as teachers. They give you all sorts of instructions and lure you and take advantage of your faith in them for their own personal gains. But if you believe that the Buddha was genuinely and completely enlightened, which means that he is totally liberated from all lobha, dosa and moha, no more greed, hatred, delusion. His mind is perfectly pure. And whatever he says is done out of compassion to help others who are still blind, helping us to fare on well in our sojourn in samsara, as well as to be totally liberated from samsara. So that's the most important thing, is to have faith in the genuine, complete awakening of the Buddha. The second thing that you need to have faith in is his teachings, particularly three aspects of his teachings. The first aspect is that the Buddha classified what is good and evil, what is wholesome and what is unwholesome. We have also got to accept that, because different philosophies have got different ways of classifying good and bad, isn't it? Like I said just now, right and wrong is relative. It depends on from which angle you are looking. Now, if you're looking from a worldly angle, a person who is on a spiritual path might be wrong. Well, not if, let's say, you are a parent and you have certain responsibilities towards your family, but then you become so interested in meditation that you abandon your family and go for retreat the whole year without doing your job, without taking care of your spouse or your children. Is that right or wrong? From the worldly point of view, it's wrong, isn't it? But from the spiritual point of view, you say that's right. The Buddha renounced his wife and child and went forth. So right and wrong is relative from where you're looking at. So the Buddha, in many of his discourses, said very clearly, this is right, this is wrong, this is good, this is bad, this is wholesome, this is unwholesome. You need to know that. Because down the line, when we come down to right effort is when you abandon what is unwholesome and you arouse and develop what is wholesome. So in order to abandon what is unwholesome, you have first of all got to recognize it, right? If you don't have the conceptual understanding, no intellectual knowledge of what is right and what is wrong, what is wholesome and what is unwholesome, how are you going to differentiate? How are you going to abandon what is unwholesome when you don't know what it is? So this intellectual understanding is very important. You need to be able to differentiate wholesomeness from unwholesomeness, skillfulness from unskillfulness. Okay, the second aspect of the Buddha's teachings that we need to accept is his teachings on anicca, dukkha, anatta and dependent arising. This is very, very important for the supramundane path. If you want to look at it very scientifically, you could say that this is just a hypothesis. As a scientist, you accept a hypothesis and then you try to verify that hypothesis by doing an experiment in the lab. You go through the procedure, carry out the experiment in order to find out and see whether this hypothesis works or not. Okay, so we accept it as a working hypothesis, that everything we can perceive through our senses is impermanent, transient, unsatisfactory, imperfect, suffering, and there's no permanent, unchanging self in total control. Why? Because everything comes about due to various causes and conditions. So things arise and pass away not because there is a permanent, unchanging entity who is controlling all these occurrences, but these things happen because of causes and conditions, some of which we can directly perceive if you meditate, if you practice mindfulness, and some you cannot fathom because it is beyond your reach. Okay, but you can also see through your own experience that your thoughts arise spontaneously without your planning them to arise, even though you may not see their immediate cause. Okay, this is something that you can experience yourself. The third aspect of the Buddha's teachings that we need to accept is the efficacy of the Noble Eightfold Path leading to complete liberation from suffering. The Noble Eightfold Path, as I said, it has 8 factors. If you want to classify it even more broadly, you can say there are only 3 sections. We have Sila, Samadhi, and Panya. Sila means morality. Samadhi means unification of the mind, collectedness or steadiness of the mind. Sometimes it is translated as one-pointedness of the mind. Sometimes it's translated as concentration. And finally, we have Panya. Panya is a difficult word to translate. Usually people translate it as wisdom, but it may not be so appropriate because Panya also has a range. It's from intellectual knowledge to insight to wisdom. So it's a range from knowledge, insight, wisdom. This is Panya. Right? We have these 3 elements there: Sila, Samadhi, Panya, morality, Samadhi, and Panya. But if you look at the Noble Eightfold Path, it starts with right view. So where does right view come from? How does it fit into this threefold scheme? It comes under Panya. So you see, Panya is not wisdom, At that point, it is only a view. It is an intellectual understanding and acceptance of the Buddha's teachings. So you start off with that view, and it is right in the sense that if you adopt this view, it will lead you to the cessation of suffering eventually. Only in that way it is right. Now we are talking about just the intellectual aspect of right view, but it's also supramundane, because this sort of right view will lead you to the cessation of suffering. To recap, there are 4 aspects. The first one is to believe that the Buddha was genuinely and completely awakened, that there is truth in the Buddha's classification of good and bad, wholesome and unwholesome. And number 3, to accept the teaching of the Buddha that everything that we can perceive through our senses is impermanent, suffering, not self, and the product of causes and conditions. And then number 4, to believe in the efficacy of the Noble Eightfold Path leading to complete now liberation from. Let's look at the supramundane experiential aspect of right view. The experiential aspect of this supramundane right view is that you need to have knowledge, insight, wisdom in respect of the 4 Noble Truths. Just now I talked about it. I said that usually people talk about realizing the 4 Noble Truths. Remember? But the first Noble Truth is not to be realized. It is to be understood, to be comprehended. The second Noble Truth is not to be realized. It is to be abandoned. Right? The third Noble Truth is to be realized. That is the cessation of suffering. But the 4th Noble Truth is also not to be realized. It is to be developed. So experientially, it means that you must understand suffering for what it is through your own experience. Not by reading, not by listening to Dharma talks. Through your own experience, what is suffering? Then to understand what is the cause of the suffering through your own experience. When you are able to understand suffering and its cause, then one fine day it will dawn upon you, why am I so stupid? Now I see the cause, and the cause is actually craving. I'm clinging to a certain idea, clinging to a certain expectation. And that is causing me the suffering because I cannot get what I want. Right? Not? And then one fine day when you realize it, then you drop it. Then you realize the third Noble Truth, which is the cessation of suffering. Cessation of that particular suffering that came about because of the particular attachment of clinging to that something. and not the total cessation of suffering. As I said, partial abandonment of craving will give you partial cessation of suffering. So, like I said, modern therapists make use of the last part of the Noble Eightfold Path. 6, 7, 8. Right effort, right mindfulness, and right samadhi. And because they don't rely too much on the first 5, the sort of cessation of suffering that they get is only partial. But don't talk about modern therapists, even you yourself, even Buddhists, your cessation of suffering will also be partial, depending on how much you can let go. This way. All of you are lay people, and all of you are working very hard. Right? Why do you work so hard? Why do you think you're working so hard for? If you have a family, it's because you want to support your family, right? And then enough is never enough. If you get 4,000 a month, you want to get more, 5, maybe 6. If you get 10,000, you want to get 20. Get 20, you want to get 50. Because your needs and your desires will increase with your salary. What's the difference between the needs and desires of a high-level executive and that of a construction worker? Essentially, it's the same. It's just a different intensity and quality only. Why not to satisfy your senses? You want to see, hear, smell, taste, feel with the body and have intellectual stimulation that will give you pleasure. Actually, what you see, hear, smell, taste by themselves are very bland, It's only how your mind interprets it, and then the mind will create the pleasure in your body. When I was in New Zealand last year, I was staying in one wat in Christchurch, and then there was one magazine that I read. It's talking about a lady. She was writing an article about her university days when she was preparing a paper on the psychology of love. To summarize, her conclusion after her study is that carnal love is actually all very self-centered. You love somebody not because you really love that somebody, It's because when you are with that somebody, it makes you feel good. It's not that somebody itself. Being with that somebody makes you feel good, and you are attached to the feeling of goodness within yourself. That's why you want to maintain that relationship. And if you look at yourself, if you are married, you will know. There's a lot of attachment. Even your children, you say that you want for their own good and all that, but actually it's also for yourself, isn't it? Because you want your children to listen to you. If they listen to you, you're happy. If they don't listen to you, will you be happy? No. So actually, in the end, it's all back to the self. It's actually very selfish. Creating your own pleasant experiences within yourself, thinking that others can actually make you happy. It's not others who make you happy, It's not others who make you sad or make you angry. You yourself make yourself angry, sad, happy, satisfied, dissatisfied. All comes from the mind. How you interpret things, how you expect things to happen. That's why the Buddha, when he defined suffering, he says birth is suffering. It's physical suffering. When you come out of your mother's womb, it's terrible. What's the first thing that the baby does when it comes out? Cry, ma. But there's one baby who came out and he said what? Oh no, not again. That was what Ajahn Brahm said. It came out in a medical journal. Okay, so birth is suffering. And then he says, old age is suffering, aging is suffering. Actually, growing up is suffering also. Yesterday only, when I was in Metta Lodge, there was this very precocious little girl of a couple. Both of them were doctors. And he said, there's so much suffering. Growing up itself is suffering. It's very strange to hear that from the girl, isn't it? They're all having fun. But this one, no, it's so much suffering. How can I get rid of my suffering? The parents are very staunch Buddhists, and the father is a very dedicated meditator. Actually, when children are born, these beings before they are born, some of them can choose where they want to be born. And your karma will also lead you to be born in a place that is suitable for you. If you are a very highly evolved being, you will end up being a couple that is highly evolved. That's why if you look at the Tibetans, the Rinpoches, even though some of them get married, their children are also Rinpoches. Many of them are Rinpoches, Tulkus. The whole family lineage, all of them are very highly evolved spiritually. because the conditions are there. The karmic conditions and the present circumstances, they attract one another. There's also one case of one of my devotees in KL. She's very, very staunch meditator, truth seeker. She's married, but she doesn't want to have children. And one day, she had this dream of this very, very bright being that came and told her, I want you to be my mother. And she said, no, please, I'm not going to have any children this life. I want to meditate. Please go away. And the being didn't want to go away, followed her, kept on appearing to her, saying he wants her to be his mother. But she didn't want to have any children because she's at the brink of wanting to renounce. So she came to ask me what to do. So I said, okay, you do some chanting, then share merits, do metta. Eventually, the being left her. Okay, so birth is suffering. Although it says aging is suffering, growing up is also suffering. There's so much suffering growing up, Nowadays, it's no fun to be kids, I tell you. No time to play tops, cannot fly kite, cannot play bokuli, cannot do anything already now. Daytime you go to school, come back, go to tuition. Sunday somehow go Sunday school. No fun to be kids anymore. So it's really suffering. Growing up is also suffering nowadays. Okay, not only is that, it says illness is suffering, everybody knows that. And then it says death is suffering, dying is suffering. People who are not prepared to die when they're dying, they are suffering. Why do they suffer? Mainly two reasons. Because they are attached to the present world, to their family, to their property, to whatever they're having at the moment. Secondly, because of fear. They don't know where they're going. Even though they may have negated the hereafter for the most part of their life, when they're about to die, this thing will come in. Because although intellectually they can negate it, but now is a time of death, and what is really going to happen, they don't know. And they have been just sweeping it under the carpet. So these are the times when the Christians come in the picture. I heard some Buddhists also are doing it now. Deathbed conversion. It's like the dying man clutching at the straw, and whatever hope that they can get. So dying is also suffering. Okay, not only that, associating with people that you don't like is also suffering. Very obvious, right? And separating from people that you love is also suffering. Very obvious. Then, what else? He says, not getting what you want is also suffering. So, these are all mental disorders. It's all mental, psychological, emotional. So that's why the Buddha's diagnosis and prescription is so relevant even today. Because people are suffering from the same old thing. Feeling unhappy when they have to work for bosses that they hate, right? And yet they love the pay that they're getting. It's a conflict. So in the end, people say, I got no choice, I got to break the precept. Are you sure you got no choice? You have the choice. Either you resign or you stay back and break the precept. That's your choice. So what is keeping you back? Craving, isn't it? Craving, because you're clinging to the job, you're clinging to the status, you're clinging to the salary. Okay, so that's it. Then not getting what you want is suffering. In short, the 5 aggregates subject to clinging are suffering by themselves. Now, the beginning part, he's talking about these things, very obvious to people. When you say that, now people will nod their heads and say, yeah, it's true, it's suffering, it's suffering. When it comes to the last one, it's not so easy to understand. Why are the 5 aggregates suffering? What are the 5 aggregates? 5 aggregates are all the rupa. Rupa means form. Form means anything that you can perceive with your senses. Visual objects, sounds, smells, tastes, bodily sensations. These are all rupa. Then you have vedana, feelings, mental feelings. Feeling nice, feeling unpleasant, feeling neutral. Then you have perception, how you perceive things. This is a big problem. How you perceive things will determine the quality of your life. And perception is something that can be conditioned. It's a resultant of conditioning. And then you have mental formations. Mental formations are actually volitional formations, something that has an urge behind it. And then the last one is consciousness. Consciousness is the bare awareness of things. For example, you may be barely aware of a sound. You're not interested in it because it's just something peripheral. Okay, for example, now you are listening to me, looking at me intently. It doesn't mean that you're not feeling your body. You're also feeling your body, right? On and off, your mind will be sometimes at the place where it is aching, where it's uncomfortable, and sometimes you come back to me, you go back and forth. But there's consciousness of many parts of the body which your mind is not conscious of. That consciousness is just bare consciousness. If it's feeling nice, feeling not nice, then there's feeling. You've got no choice, feeling is there. Perception is when you see something, automatically you recognize it. Oh, there's a man, there's a woman, there's a monk. You recognize the words that I'm talking to you, what it means. That's why you can understand this whole talk. If I were to speak in a foreign language, you wouldn't understand, right? It would just be sound. But volitional formation requires an urge, an intention. A very good example is memory. When you look at this article, you know what it is? See what it is? Okay, you recognize what it is, right? You don't have to think too much. But if I asked you, where did you place your shoes before you came in? On the right side of the door, on the left side of the door? Then you have to think. Hey, let me think. Where did I put it? Right? Okay, so these are two aspects of memory. One aspect of memory is something spontaneous. You recognize the thing. That's under perception. The other type of memory is something intentional. You have to think about where you put your shoes. That is intentional. So that is volitional. That is volitional formations of the mind. So whenever you have thoughts, sometimes thoughts just appear spontaneously. Right? Especially when you're meditating, then visual images sometimes may just pop up. Thoughts may just pop up. And then you recognize them. That is perception. But when you decide that you want to pursue those thoughts because they are interesting, that's sankhara, that's mental formations. So the Buddha says that all these 5 aggregates are suffering. Why is it suffering? You can't really understand the suffering. The earlier sort of suffering you can, but this sort of suffering is very profound. This sort of suffering can only be understood or comprehended through meditative experience, mindfulness. Watching how your mind is reacting or responding to the objects of the senses. Right view. Once you have right view, since you already know or you already believe that there is a result of good and bad actions that will influence your intentions. Right intention is that you try not to get too obsessed with sensual desires. Ideally, is renunciation. Now, renunciation does not necessarily mean becoming a monk or a nun. It means renouncing your desires for pleasures of the senses. Then the second is to abandon ill will, anger, disappointment, aversion, especially with people, and having malevolent thoughts towards others. The next one is having intentions of harming other people, other beings. So if you have all these thoughts, you are not on the Noble Eightfold Path. If you are walking on the Noble Eightfold Path, whenever you recognize that such thoughts are there, you should abandon them. This comes under right view. Now, this right intention will also affect your speech and your actions, isn't it? Right? If you are able to have right intentions, that means you don't have ill will, you don't have harmful thoughts, and you don't have excessive sensual desires, then that will prevent you from saying the wrong things or doing the wrong things, unethical things. Why do people break the precepts? It's because of greed, because of hatred, because of delusion. So if you have the ethical part well taken care of, then it is also connected to right effort. In fact, the Buddha says that in order to walk the Noble Eightfold Path effectively, there are 3 factors which are most important. Right view, right effort, and right mindfulness. Right view is the intellectual understanding you have. And then right mindfulness is remembering it. Often we forget the teaching and then we say and do things which are wrong. But if you remember the teachings, you remember that this is right and this is wrong, this is wholesome, this is unwholesome, then you must put in the effort to abandon what is unwholesome and to develop what is wholesome, isn't it? So these 3 must be there. Without these 3, nothing works. We remember this because this is also what modern therapists are doing. They're making use of these 3 things. right view with respect to their therapy methods, and right mindfulness with respect to remembering their techniques and putting it into practice, which is also part of right effort. So tonight I'm talking about ancient wisdom, which is the Buddha's diagnosis of a universal problem that we have, a universal disorder, which is actually suffering. And he also gave us the cause of the suffering and the end result of how we can be liberated from this suffering if we follow his prescription, which is the Noble Eightfold Path. But as I said earlier, and I want to reiterate, if you can totally abandon craving, then you will totally extinguish all sufferings. If you can temporarily abandon craving, you will temporarily achieve a cessation of suffering. If you can partially abandon craving, then you will get partial extinguishment of suffering. So it depends on your own practice. Buddhas and teachers can only point the way, you have to walk it yourself. And this is what modern therapists are also doing. They are telling the patients you have to do the work. Don't just come here and get the medication and just eat. You have to do the work yourself to solve your own problem. Right effort is also very important. And right effort means to prevent unwholesome states from arising and to abandon wholesome states that have already arisen. That's one aspect. The other pair is concerned with wholesome states, to arouse wholesome states that have not yet arisen and to maintain and develop wholesome states that have already arisen. Although it looks very simple, actually this requires also right view, isn't it? How would you know what is wholesome or unwholesome if you have not studied the Buddha's teaching? If you have not accepted the Buddha's teaching as something that's genuine, you will not be able to differentiate what is wholesome and what is unwholesome, and the effort that you put in could be misdirected effort. So you must know what is wholesome and what is unwholesome first, and then the moment you realize that something unwholesome has arisen, you have to abandon it. That comes also through mindfulness, remembering the teachings, isn't it? You remember the teachings one thing, and you remind yourself to put it into practice. And thirdly, you have to look back at your thoughts. If you don't look back at your thoughts, how would you know what is happening? You wouldn't. You'll just be carried away by your thoughts. So that's why right view is important. And right mindfulness is also important for right mindfulness. So today I'm going to talk about right mindfulness because the modern therapies that we are going to deal with tonight make use of mostly mindfulness. Mindfulness is a word that is used so often these days that people tend to get confused. What does it really mean? Sometimes people use mindfulness to mean just being aware, being in the present moment. But just now I said that mindfulness means being able to remember what you have learned, reminding yourself to put what you have learned into practice, and looking back at your thoughts, right? So this has nothing to do with the present. It's got to do with the past, something that you have seen, heard about, and read about in the past, then reminding yourself to do something that you have learned about, and looking at your thoughts which have just occurred. But actually, this is all very relative, because when we talk about past, present, and future, it's not so easy to draw the line. If I say, be present, the moment I finish saying that, it's really the past, isn't it? The past could be a distant past, like aeons ago. It could be not so distant, like last year, or last week, or an hour ago, or 10 minutes ago, 2 minutes ago, a few seconds ago, a few milliseconds ago. This is still past, isn't it? But as you come nearer and nearer, it approaches the present, but it's never in the present. Actually, the present never exists. The moment you say it, it's gone. If it hasn't come yet, then it's in the future. So how can you ever be present? Well, in this conventional world, we have to use conventional language. But the word mindfulness is a translation of the word sati in Pali, which is a noun of the verb sarati. Sarati means to recall, to remember, to remind. So it's actually to recall, to remember, to remind, to look back, all deal with past objects, right? Not with present objects. There is another phrase that the Buddha uses very often in his suttas. It's called Sati Sambhajanya. Sati is mindfulness. Sambhajanya is full awareness. So when people say be aware, be in the present, they're actually talking more about awareness, full awareness. And full awareness can also range from just a very bare awareness to intellectual consideration to insight and wisdom. So there's a range of full awareness. So here we're talking about mindfulness. Right mindfulness is defined in many suttas as remembering to repeatedly observe the body as the body, not me, not mine, not myself. The body is just the body, is a phenomena. To observe feelings as feelings, not my feelings, not me, not myself. Same for mind. Same for Dhamma. Okay, what is Dhamma? This one is a bit complicated. Now, the word Dhamma literally is used just like the word thing is in English. I don't know anything. I know everything. You know, that sort of thing. It can be used as loosely as the word thing. It's very general. But here, in this particular sense, one can look at it from three aspects. One is that it's a mental object, an object of the mind, as opposed to an object of the five senses. All right. The five senses can only take very specific objects. The eye can only see colors. Ears can only hear sound. Nose can only smell smells. And the tongue can only taste tastes. The body can only be aware of sensations. The eye cannot hear, and the ear cannot see. Right? They are very specific in the objects. But the mind can do everything. Do you believe that? When you're fast asleep and all your senses are shut down and you have a nice dream, you can be doing everything inside there, right? Singing, laughing, dancing, quarreling, running away, killing, all sorts of things. Full color and full senses. But it's the mind. So mental objects refer to objects of the mind that are very special. Not just the five senses, but more than that, which are concepts, fantasies, imagination, planning, scheming, and so forth. You know, all these things. These are mental objects. Now, another way of looking at Dhamma is natural principles. How things are connected with one another, how they are related to one another, causes and conditions, cause and effect. These are also concepts, but they can become objects of the mind. The mind can understand all these things. Not your eye, not your ear, not your nose, not your tongue, not your body, but the mind. But in this sense, in the observation of Dhamma as Dhamma, we are referring to looking at specific mental objects and understanding certain natural principles according to the Buddha's teachings. In one sutta called the Satipatthana Sutta, the discourse on the establishments of mindfulness, it is divided into four main sections. The one is contemplation or observation of the body, observation of feelings, observation of mind, and observation of the Dhamma. And under observation of Dhamma, there are many subsections, and they are categorized according to the Buddha's teachings. If you're observing Dhamma in other ways, like scientists are doing, scientists are observing Dhamma too. You know, they are looking at natural phenomena, they are studying atoms and molecules and biochemistry of human body, right? But they are not looking at it in terms of the Buddha's teaching. They are looking at the natural principles and laws connected with these things, not from the view of anicca, dukkha, anatta. No, they are looking at it from another point of view. They are trying to understand the principles of nature so that man can control nature. It's different from us. We are trying to understand nature so that we don't control it. We become part of nature, we understand the true nature of nature and be liberated from its laws. So it's a different approach. So observing Dhamma as Dhamma is to see this Dhamma as just natural phenomena, exhibiting these characteristics of impermanence, unsatisfactoriness, suffering, not self, as well as all products of causes and conditions, all due to conditionality. I will come back to this because this is very important. Most of the modern psychotherapies are based on this. They are actually encouraging or explaining to their clients to actually observe their minds, to observe what is happening to their minds, what are the contents of the minds, what is the mind thinking about, what is the nature of the thoughts, what are the thought patterns that influence your behavior. This is the crux of psychotherapy, because psychotherapy believes that thoughts and emotions influence behavior and vice versa. Very, very much according to the ancient wisdom of the Buddha. Not to say that this is the sole copyright monopoly of Buddhists, because the Buddha only discovered nature. He discovered nature, the principles of nature, and anybody else can also discover the same thing if you do it the right way. So it's no surprise that scientists who are objective and rational in their approach will also discover similar things that the Buddha himself discovered. It's not that they are trying to copy from Buddhism, but it's really there. If you do it the right way, you will discover the same thing. We also didn't really talk very much about right samadhi. And right samadhi here means unification of the mind. Sometimes it's translated as non-distractedness. It's defined also as non-distractedness in the suttas. Sometimes people use the word focus, mental steadiness, and sometimes people use the word concentration as well. But these are the characteristics of right samadhi. I prefer not to translate the word as right concentration, because the word concentration may be a bit misleading for some people. So I just stick to the word samadhi. But right samadhi only occurs when the other 7 factors of the Noble Path accompanies it. If it's not accompanied by the other 7 factors of the path, then it's not right samadhi, even though your mind may be very unified. Just like a sniper. A sniper who is aiming at his victim is very concentrated, isn't it? Very, very concentrated. But is that right mindfulness? Is that right concentration? No. Or you may be very absorbed in whatever task that you're doing. That is also a form of samadhi, but that is not right samadhi, because it does not involve the other 7 factors of the Noble Path. Right samadhi is also very important. But if you look at the Noble Eightfold Path, sometimes the Buddha explains the Noble Eightfold Path in a linear fashion. It starts off with right view. You can expect a person with right view to have right intentions. Right intentions, motivations that are not influenced by sensual desires, not influenced by ill will or by harmfulness. And when your mind is pure, your mind is not influenced by sensual desires, not influenced by ill will, and not influenced by harmfulness, then it can be expected that you will speak right speech. You will not tell lies, you will not speak harshly to people, you will not say things that will divide people who are united, and you will not engage in frivolous talk. Similarly, if you have the right intentions, not influenced by sensual desires, nor by ill will or harmfulness, then you will also refrain from killing, from stealing, from sexual misconduct. That covers right speech and right action. So a person who has got right speech and right action also can be expected not to engage in wrong livelihood. Wrong livelihood is any sort of livelihood that involves breaking the precepts or that is harmful and causes damage to other beings. Okay, then when a person has got all these things, then you can say that he has got right effort. Because you need right effort in order to maintain your right intention, right motivation. You need right effort to bring about right speech, right action, right livelihood. Then right mindfulness also comes about because you remember all these things. And finally, when you have right mindfulness in the way that we just defined, that means remembering to repeatedly observe the body as body, feelings as feelings, mind as mind, Dhamma as Dhamma, then your mind becomes settled, becomes undistracted and unified. And when that happens, then your right view, instead of a mundane right view or super mundane intellectual right view, would then bring about super mundane experiential insight and wisdom. It comes in its wake.